And there we go. Everybody out there in live stream lands, welcome to the Oil and Gas Global Network. This program is part of a series called The Search for ROI. And today we're going to talk about advantaged oil because, of course, advantaged oil is in the spotlight quite a lot as of late as companies are shifting their focus to extracting more value from their producing assets. So that's going to be the focus for today. Before we get to that, I do want to make sure that we thank our sponsors. Our sponsor for this whole series is Power Advocate. And if you're not familiar with Power Advocate, you can check them out at poweradvocate.com. But don't do that right now because you're going to miss everything that we're about to say. We also have a fantastic group of guests, as you can already see their smiling faces on the screen. And we're gonna get they have a lot to say, so I'm gonna try to be very brief. There's just a couple of more things, which is that I want to first tell everybody that if you have questions throughout this whole thing, you can put the questions in the platform, however you typically put your questions in. And but we're gonna hold the questions till the end. And so don't go anywhere because we will get to those questions at the end. But feel free to put them in, anytime you want. Also, this live stream, in case you're missing it. No, wait, you're not missing it because you're watching right now. But in case your friends are missing this live stream and you want them to see it, it will be available on demand later. You can share it with all your friends and family, play it at your next, graduation party or whatever you want to do. So that'll be you just go back to the LinkedIn post and you'll see how to get to the on-demand version. That's it. Without any further talking from me, let's get to the intros, and we're gonna start with the person sitting next to me, as it were, and who is also coincidentally our sponsor, Power Advocate, was kind enough to loan us a guest today. So we have Sean Curley, who is a vice president at Power Advocate, and Sean, I know you got a background in energy and financials and investments and consulting, which makes you a perfect guest for the show. What else do you want us to know about you? And this is a place where you could drop in like a little plug for Power Advocate if you want.
Yeah, sure. No, appreciate you having us, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining us virtually. So maybe just more about myself, Sean Curley, a VP with Power Advocate Group, predominantly work within our oil and gas practice. So to Michael's point, I hope I can be a worthy participant in the discussion today. From a Power Advocate perspective, data and analytics company, been around for 20 years plus. Our core focus is providing customers with better insight into their operating efficiency, their costs, and their ESG performance. We do this through a variety of tools that we offer our customers, and in addition to consulting services, all of which are informed by a unique fact base of over $6 trillion of energy-specific supply chain spend, tens of thousands of sourcing bids, tens of thousands of commodity indices, et cetera. So we roll all that data up together, and we deliver insights to our customers through our platform. And again, Michael, appreciate the time this afternoon. Appreciate everyone joining us today as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I remember $6 trillion used to sound like a big number. It is still a big number, but it is at least imaginable. Next, kind of going around the circle, we have Tracy Solomons from our friends joining us from our friends at IBM, and IBM is a big friend of OGGN, so thank you for that. You sponsor a lot of stuff, and I know, Tracy, that your focus now is at IBM is big data and analytics, or at least I think that's what it is. But I also know that you have a G&G background as well. So tie that all together for us and help us understand who you are.
Sure thing. Thanks, and I appreciate the opportunity. Tracy Solomons. I'm the upstream lead with IBM based out of Houston. And as Michael said, I work in the big data and analytics group. A lot of people are still pretty jaded with regards to what IBM does in the oil and gas industry. And so we're bringing relevance back to the oil and gas industry holistically, not just in operations or maintenance, front office, back office, and really looking at that big picture. And I think with the ESG trends happening right now, even a bigger ask to have a holistic view. And so as a systems integrator, IBM is here to help.
Excellent. Thank you. IBM is always here to help. And last, for the big finale, we have Mr. Jorge McNish. Jorge and I were just having a conversation about all the different ways that people say his name. So Jorge, thank you. I'm not sure if you need an introduction, but I know right now you are the CEO of Datagration, which is a company that I have a lot of admiration for. You also have several marquee companies and your track record over something like 30 something years. And so pick part of that you want to tell us about.
Well, exciting. We're living in an amazing time in our industry. There's technology, convergence of cloud computing, data, and workflow automation, knowledge automation. It's amazing. So I'm the president and CEO of Datagration, and we leverage data to support better decision making from a subsurface perspective, but also for surface, and quite complementary to the panel here today. So looking forward to a great conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. Very good. That's all of us. I don't need to introduce me. I'm just the guy who shows up from OGGN and makes these things go. So advantaged oil. We're talking about something called, and I've seen it in the headlines quite a lot in the last several months, which is probably why I suggested it as the topic for this panel. But maybe not everybody in the audience is, or maybe we don't all have the same idea about what is an advantaged oil project. What qualifies. We know that the idea is that executives at oil companies are standing back and going, we need to only develop the stuff that really fits the plan. And so let's start with Sean, because this is kind of in your wheelhouse. When you're out there talking with folks, what does an advantaged oil project look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a tough one too. So I guess a couple of thoughts. One is that I think in today's, certainly with our customers, and I'd be curious to hear Jorge and Tracy, I'm sorry, Tracy.
The brain is doing too many things at once.
It's going too fast. I get it. Jorge and Tracy's point of view on this as well. I think among our customers, it's really about advantage projects generally, in that investment decisions are sort of expanding beyond traditional oil and gas investments now. Firms are looking at renewables projects. They're looking at opportunities to self-power. They're looking at opportunities to invest in asset classes that are adjacent to oil and gas, perhaps, and maybe within the energy vertical more broadly, but not necessarily oil. But that all said, oil, of course, is a tremendously important part of many of our customers' development profile, and therefore what defines an advantage project can really be a moving target, I think, depending on sort of the forces du jour in the market. And I think today there are a variety of things that we could speak to. There's two that pop to mind that I think of as being perhaps more important. First, certainly the dollar cost economics of a project. I think it's generally maybe self-evident that volatility in our industry has put a premium on advantaged cost from a project perspective, and certainly given where oil's been over the last 18 months and the ride that it's been on, being very shrewd deployers of capital is very, very important for oil and gas firms right now. So the cost economics associated with the project, I think, are very, very important. Not to mention the fact that, as we sort of transition toward what's certainly now and will continue to be an inflationary cost market, managing costs is as important as ever. So I think that's certainly one dimension that a lot of our customers are thinking about. I think a second dimension, and perhaps an emerging dimension, which is gaining more and more attention from investors, from the boardroom, et cetera, is the ESG component as well, the carbon cost economics, if you will, of a project. Not all projects are created equally, certainly on a cost perspective, and certainly also on a carbon cost perspective. And therefore, having taking into account the environmental impact from a carbon emissions perspective on a given development project is, I think, top of mind from a project evaluation perspective broadly for oil and gas and for or other
Sure.
types of assets. The
Sure.
trick, though, I think, is there's this trade-off, right? That I think a lot of executives are balancing. How do we think about low cost, high carbon, low carbon, high cost projects, and what's the sweet spot,
I have to write,
if you will?
I have to write that down. Was it
Yeah.
low carbon, high carbon? Yeah. I
Right,
think we
right.
get it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, getting to that
all of
sweet
those,
spot.
all those parameters, like what's the sweet spot, right?
Yeah. And I think, to the extent that operators can define a sweet spot for themselves, I think that is maybe how you might define an advantaged oil project for that firm. The hard part, of course, is how do you get there?
Sure.
And that's certainly, I'm sure, something we'll talk about as part of this discussion is, equating, the two bottom lines that executives are trying to manage.
Yeah, we do have that. I think I have that further down on my iPad right here. We are gonna get to how do you actually do this, but that's a good summary. Thank you. I think I like it. What was it you said? An emerging dimension. That sounds kind of like a quantum physics problem, but I think I know where you're headed. And of course you can't walk through a room these days without hearing somebody have an ESG conversation. So it's no surprise that comes into the mix. I forgot to mention too that this is can be a complete free for all. So Jorge and Tracy, anybody jump in whenever you like. Any other thoughts come to mind before we kind of move on to? And I want to get back to the ESG topic as well. But what else is in the heads of people as they're thinking either about evaluating their existing assets or looking at new developments?
I guess I can start, and Tracy, maybe you can go next. But I think the industry has done a wonderful job at delivering amazing energy in a very responsible manner over decades. But we're in an interesting convergence at the moment, and where we see there's several forces that are coming into the industry, and we're just coming out of a very challenging last few months. And you're absolutely right. I think that advantage problem. Everyone is looking for those advantages. The sort of their competitive capabilities and how to adapt in a very fast-moving world. And the industry is always responded very well. We're an industry of doers, and right. Hopefully by the time we get done here today, you'll have a few ideas and a few pointers which are actionable for each one of you. But advantage oil's projects, are the ones that create competitive advantage, are the ones that differentiate companies that will succeed as a result of this, and some may not succeed as a result of this. So, and the good news is that there's plenty of tools out there. There are tools, there are methodologies that can be implemented, and so I think that's where the opportunity is for everyone to really develop their advantage projects.
Yeah, that's. It's we're going to get to the tools thing in a minute too, but it's not like this is a new idea, right? But it's a new era so somebody might be listening and think, well, isn't that kind of obvious? You want to develop the ones that have the best economics, but the pressure is there's so much less tolerance for risk. And you have to, the pressure is so much higher now. The stakes are higher, really. So I think that's why it comes into the limelight. Tracy, how does it compare to back in your G&G days when it was just a free for all and you could do whatever you wanted?
Yeah, I think something for me personally that I want to take away from my upstream life and say now that we're overlaying ESG is, let's learn from things that we're trying to rectify in upstream, where we're very silo focused.
Right.
In order to get the real benefits of ESG, we need to have that holistic view. So let's set ourselves up for success. And Hoy and I were saying earlier, it's not just about the project that we're getting done today in the field. It's what does that look like long term? If we look at a well or development, for example, well, what does it take to continue that production down the line, and looking at MRO, maintenance, everything associated to. I think emissions is a great thing to be tracking right now, but that's one parcel. Looking at GHG, what about the rest of it? When you look at how the operators are being vetted by, there's a new term called impact investing that we're being vetted against. So
Sure.
let's make sure we find that metrics, and somebody like Sean's company is like, okay, we need to understand holistically what we're up against. And
Yeah.
so I think one of the things that I've taken away with my short time here at IBM, there's a lot IBM's done inside other industries to say, hey, what can we lift and shift and kind of help and accelerate some of what we can do in oil and gas.
Right.
Something I found beneficial, very beneficial.
Yeah. Thank you. It's funny. I always notice that we can never do anything like this about, in our industry, never have any of these conversations where we don't, it doesn't take long before somebody mentions the word silos, and they always, they're kind of, and they're still there. And so that, I think, but I want to go back to also you're a little bit on this ESG thread too. So let's stick with that for a second, because it's kind of again, the idea of evaluating a development project, the economics of it is not new, but now we're bringing this, ESG component into that economic kind of evaluation model. And Sean, I know that somewhere I saw something in something related to you or Power Advocate, where there was somebody said something about a data-driven ESG strategy. So is that something that helps companies kind of bring the ESG evaluation into this whole advantaged oil discussion?
Yeah, I think so. I think
I hope so, because that was why. That's why.
Yeah, right. You set me up well. Yeah, I think so. To the reference you made. So we actually we're pushing out data of this type to customers actively through our esgdata.com website. So from perhaps for some examples, and again, maybe don't click away just now, but after the session, feel free to visit the website esgdata.com to sort of, I think, see real examples of how operators are leveraging not just cost insight information, but also ESG performance insight to make operating decisions. I'll use the word, Michael, that you said that you'd hate to hear, but silo. I think, maybe 5 years ago, I think that a lot of CSR, ESG, sustainability decision making may have been separate and distinct from what operations was doing, or how capital was deployed. Right. It was maybe and not just oil and gas, really, frankly, across all industries, maybe more of a check the box kind of approach to doing the things that investors required at the time. Game's completely shifted. The concept of making operating decisions independent of the impact it's going to have on the environment, on local economies, on diverse groups, is really not a winning strategy anymore. And therefore, the trick is to ensure that you are not developing siloed workflows around ESG decision making that are not integrated into the operating workflow of the business. And as I sort of noted a moment ago, it's incredibly difficult to do that because connecting or translating the ESG impact of a decision versus the cost impact of the decision, the language, the data language, the decision tree used in either scenario might not align well unless you've sort of built tools and frameworks to make it work. And I'll share one example specifically around kind of connecting this concept of cost and carbon. So naturally, for any given project, there's not only the kind of immediate environmental impact the project will have, but also sort of the tertiary impact, the upstream supply chain carbon impact of the pipe you're buying and the fuel you're burning and all the rest. And what most operators don't, what certainly probably a lot of operators do understand but have trouble reconciling with, or perhaps trouble measuring accurately, is that component of what they're doing. It's easy enough to kind of understand, what is the direct impact of my operation on the environment or on my local community. It's harder to know what the upstream impact is. What are my suppliers doing? What are their suppliers doing? Is my content coming from a safe, responsible jurisdiction? From an ESG perspective, a lot of those questions are hard to answer, and if you distill those elements into kind of a quantifiable comparison, then you can begin to make choices between, well, I want to work with this supplier, or I want to work with this supplier.
Right.
And to finish the example, I guess maybe OCTG is a really good example of this. From where you source your OCTG may have a far greater carbon impact on your total emissions footprint than your flaring. When you quantify the total amount of steel consumed over the course of your capital program, it's very likely that just deciding to work with a vendor who has more efficient manufacturing facilities, shorter supply chain, may in fact have a greater carbon impact than your flaring program.
Yeah. But right. So the obvious places aren't always necessarily the right places to look. But as you mentioned, it depends on data, and data. So that's the other thing, that we can never have any conversation about anything in this industry. We always end up talking about, there's three things that always come up: silos, data, and culture. So we haven't hit culture yet, but I'm sure it's going to come up here pretty soon. So, but Jorge, I mean, you've been around the industry for a long time. How do you how does this look to you in terms of, I mean, it sounds good on paper, but can we really get our heads around all this data and make these types of decisions and actually drive them back out into the operations the way they need to be? That's once you get past the data scientists, it's where the rubber hits the road.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's an opportunity for the industry to actually make money with ESG. It's much like when we transitioned from HSC related issues back in the 80s and 70s, where we realized that it was good business practice to do so. And I think that's the journey that we're on at the moment. It's not just about compliance and reporting all your requirements, but it's how do you integrate that as part of your business. And I agree with the comments so far. So the critical component of this is making it in a practical to the organization. How do you measure something that will have a consequence sometime later in the workflow? So if you can understand where the gas intrusions are coming from, the various different parts of the reservoir, and what the impact is going to be on flaring, for example, then you can start proactively managing that and trying to make decisions regarding what is the best deployment of your capital and your costing. So if you link those two worlds together and then look at different components, this is mostly on the environment, but there's a social and governance component as well, and how to benchmark yourself against others and the likes. And so we're getting into a world that is currently very fragmented, the requirements of the various companies, and relies a lot on the company culture in order to be able to do that. The good news is that we're seeing some leaders in the space that are really taking the forefront of this and optimizing their entire process to look at integrating data from various different silos, for lack of a better descriptor, and then supporting a decision, if you would, and that's exciting, because I think that is definitely is a direction that the industry is going, and I think that society is going to very much appreciates that. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I know at Datagration you're building a whole business around that, and and so you mentioned a couple things there. Guys, it's beautiful. It's almost like you have the notes for where we want to go with this conversation, because you mentioned benchmarking, which we want to get back to. But earlier on, somebody also mentioned tools. We've been, so we've talked a lot about the what so far, and we're almost halfway through. So let's talk about because one of the things that came up, in some previous conversations was, well, we have capabilities now that we didn't have before. So yes, the stakes are higher. Yes, it's so much more important to be able to get these evaluations right and really understand what projects to work. But we're drowning in data and silos and all that. But we do have capabilities that we didn't have before. And so maybe, Tracy, why don't you start with this one, because you're the data and analytics person. And you're at IBM, they have all the cool stuff. So what kind of, and especially as you look back at your history being more on the industry side, what do you think about in terms now of the capabilities that we have that can actually make this stuff work better?
I think over the last 18 months, been working with some operators who are definitely embracing the technology that's out there, right? Lots of people have different platforms, and it's really synthesizing that data. If we look at some of the larger projects, I think Sean mentioned earlier, looking at a advantage ROI or advantage oil and what the ROI would be. We have some operators looking at, 70 years in a basin who are doing expansions and are saying what would be best with regards to economics and ESG to say, hey, I want to reduce my cycle time for full field planning for facilities. What does those mods need to look like when I'm building up? Do I really want to make new manufacturing? Would it be cheaper or more cost effective or have a better footprint if I actually connect into what is pre-existing? So all of that's happening. And I think when you look at things like knowledge graphs, how are all of these things interconnected? And then the relationship that's kind of changed between OEM, OFS, and operator, where those three distinct groups of people are getting to a place where they're actually considering sharing data, but they all have their individual IPs, but they want to learn collectively as an industry. We want to grow. And so bringing technologies like federated learning to the table. If we look at automotive and what they're doing, everybody has IP they're trying to protect, but collectively we all want to learn and shorten that cycle time for where we want to do. So lots of things like that and I think operators are really starting to embrace that.
Yeah, the collaboration, the willingness to collaborate is certainly much higher now than it was historically in the industry. So I think there's much more of a focus on, especially if we can separate what really is competitive advantage from what's not, and we all work together on the part that's not, then that kind of helps the whole industry, right? Because we're not only, and I think I said this on a previous one of these episodes, but we're not only competing, the companies aren't only competing with each other now, which they are, but also as an industry, we're sort of competing for our future, success and livelihood. And so there's a little bit of a on the same team aspect to that. But again, it comes back to this data thing, and we can talk, about all the machine learning and the AI and all the things that we can do, but the data has to come together. And Jorge, I mentioned that you have a whole company built around this, and you and I, I think maybe we were doing a podcast together or something at one point. And I said, okay, so you're bringing all the data together in one place, which sounds like awfully like we've heard that one before, right? And then you corrected me. You said, no, we're bringing, and I can't remember if you said all the necessary data or all the critical data or all the stuff so how does that, how does that apply to what's happening here as we're trying to evaluate advantaged oil projects? Is it feasible? Can we do that? Can we get it all together so we can run all the cool tech stuff against it?
Absolutely. And I think that technology today, much like we're commercializing, it enables you to have a very sophisticated capability of accessing critical data. Is not all data, and it's critical data that may come from different sources. And those sources could be handwritten reports, or it could be data lakes, very sophisticated data lakes. So, but the most important thing is, what data is critical in order for you to automate a workflow that creates knowledge automation in the context of optimizing a decision-making process. So you have to start with what kind of decision you're trying to make first, and what are the trade-offs that you're willing to live with, and then and put that in context of your operations and your business and the business outcome. And then decide, and within the specific, what are critical data that's required in order to achieve that, and run that through an automated workflow capability, leveraging the latest tools, and also bringing in best practices associated with that. Everyone is trying to achieve an advantage oil project, and for that, they believe that they have competitive advantage. So an open system, agnostic in the context of being able to absorb data, and at the same time leverage that data in a decision-making process. And I think that is very unique in the industry. I think that that is the direction that the industry is moving, and it's exciting. And I think that's could bring significant leverage on to operators. That's
good. And ironically, brings us back to the benchmarking topic, because it as we think about getting all this data together and being able to do all the right things with it, immediately it makes me think, okay, but how do I know what's good? How do I know? And as we begin to take action and make progress, are we, and we're kind of getting into the execution. We're kind of, we've talked about some tools, and we promised that we would get to the getting it done part of the conversation, which is what this kind of gets into. But and Sean, I know that you guys you use the word benchmarking a lot. I think you used it in the introduction. What does benchmarking mean when we talk about coming into this scenario, and what do you look for there?
Yeah, benchmarking is an interesting one in that any dimension of capability can be benchmarked. It's really just a matter of what you're trying to measure. From our point of view, kind of operating outcomes from a cost, delivery, ESG perspective are really the areas that kind of we feel are most impactful, and certainly as it germane to this conversation around advantaged oil projects. It can't be the case that all operators are top performing. It just can't be. It's sort of that the fallacy of everyone reports that they they're a good driver, but
the stock market certainly doesn't think that they're all
right, exactly. And so clearly there's something happening where there's a disconnect sometimes between kind of what's happening out there in the marketplace and what the operator's perception of their operation is. And in most instances, operators are striving to be best in class and have a desire to be. The problem, though, is that by definition, benchmarking yourself to others on metrics and parameters that are going to drive competitive advantage are very, very challenging, and in many cases impossible, because if it drives competitive advantage, it's likely to be a piece of information that you're not sharing publicly.
Sure.
The key insight, and as Jorge sort of noted a moment ago, as the industry shifts more toward collaboration, data availability, opportunities emerge for more sophisticated ways of evaluating performance. Our sort of approach to this is really leveraging fact-based information that's sort of unique and one of a kind in the industry to help operators understand in an anonymized way, how do you stack up and where do you perform well and where do you not perform well. And it's only when you have access to those kind of data sources where you can begin to put meaning behind your own performance relative to others. And again, whether that's on what is my carbon emissions on a project perspective benchmark, what is my cost on a rigs contract benchmark, what is my total delivered cost on a dollar per foot basis benchmark, and down the line. And only then can you begin to evaluate, not just within my own development portfolio, what's advantaged and what's not, but within the broader portfolio of projects that investors have sort of opportunity to invest behind, where do you stack up?
Right. That's, that is, that is a key. And so there's this whole aspect of accountability, being able to say, so anytime you're evaluating and analyzing something and saying, this is what we're going to do, presumably there's going to come a point where you look back to see if you did. And Tracy, right? So I'm sure back in your G&G days, one of the things that struck me when I first started getting involved with folks in that particular discipline some years ago, and Jorge, you were in this same world, is all these really smart, like geo people would use all this really cool software and all this really cool science and math to essentially make a very, very strong, educated guess about what exists and how you ought to approach it, right? And then they'd hand that off to the, down to the next silo, as it were, and then somebody would go take action on whatever they created. And the first thing that struck me, especially coming from the consulting world, was nobody ever came back and said, like, did you get it right? And if you didn't get it right, okay, we understand it's a guess, but maybe based on what we learned after you did the thing, maybe we should change, like maybe we need to tweak the algorithms for the next time, right? And so so Tracy and Jorge, I think you know what I'm talking about, but what I'm trying to get at is this concept of the connecting the whole, connecting all of this stuff across the whole value chain, so that and where Sean's talking about benchmarking, we can actually look and see how did it turn out, and then how do we kind of bring that back and improve the whole thing all the way through. So I'm a little off script at this point, but you get
no.
What thoughts do you have?
I think that's a great thing. And going back to how far we've come with regards to technology, that's possible now. And we've talked about openness and being agnostic, but it is the ability to create that feedback loop, because with visibility to the data to say, hey, we were off. What do we do different? And we've been doing that, I think, in industry. When I was working projects 15 years ago, that was happening, but for a group of people. Now we want to look across all of it.
The whole thing, right?
Exactly. And because of analytics, warehousing, and just accessibility, that transparency is available now to a swath of people across all those different pieces, and they can actually come together meaningfully and saying, this is how quickly we're going to make an adjustment, because we can see that we might have done something slightly better, or we can make an improvement X, Y, and Z. So I think even with things like 5G, I know a customer in the Permian who has their own microgrid, right? We're like, look, we're burning a lot of diesel to keep these frac fleets up. What else can we do? Right. Running their own microgrid, I think earlier Sean was saying, what are we doing with oil and gas adjacent energy? Where operators are looking at all of that. It's a place that they're starting to expand their footprint and say, how can we help here and giving back? So I think we're there. It's happening.
That's good. It's good to know. It's
the one thing I would add is that thank you for that. Is that this last 12, 14 months has accelerated all of that. It is enabling us to reach out and begin to look at different ways to conduct our business, to collaborate across teams. Look at the call here today. So it's very, very unique opportunity that we're facing, and this is going to accelerate what you're just describing. The adoption of some of these tools and capabilities that now are finally converging. So we've been thinking about this convergence for quite some time, and finally now we're getting to the point where operators are taking advantage of it, and which is a great opportunity for the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, I agree, and I want to bring up something that I won't take credit for, because I heard you say this before, Jorge. But the idea is that we can actually, what was it you said? Something like create and not inherit advantaged oil projects, right? So in other words, the way I understand that is we can what might not have qualified 20 years ago, because of the things we can do, we can actually make that improve the economics on something because of the capabilities we have. Is that, did I get that right? Is that
absolutely? I think is up to us to create those advantages, and not those advantages to occur by themselves. And we've always done that as an industry. So we've adapted, and every time that we've been at a point of inflection, the industry innovated itself. Look at what we've done with horizontal drilling or offshore drilling, etc.
Right.
And I think that over the years, the industry has always proven that can take a leadership role and actually bring amazing opportunities on and to create affordable energy. And I think that goes to the fact that folks, very smart folks, are working on trying to come up with advantage oil projects, and the tools are out there and the methods are out there for them to be leveraged, and it's up to each organization to do that. And I don't want to diminish the human factor, because technology can only take you so far. I think that there is a human component of this on adopting technology that goes back to the concept of culture that you described earlier, and I think is an important part of the equation as you look at the teams working in collaboration remotely and so forth. I have customers that are in different parts of the world, in the Middle East, in India, for example, recently, that have several thousand people that they have to communicate. They have to direct those people, and they have to collaborate with collaboration tools they have to decide where to go invest their capital. And I think that's this whole situation has brought us into this great opportunity for the industry to really take the leadership role and demonstrate other industry how it's done.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's exactly right. And you're nicely enough, again, you're segueing into the next well, we always want to usually with these kinds of things, we always kind of wrap up with like what's coming, what's in the future sort of discussions. So if we just sum up where we are so far, is we've said, okay, advantaged oil is really in the forefront. It's not just the financial economics, but it's the carbon economics, if you will. All of that has to be evaluated and analyzed to make the right decisions. But good news, because of the capabilities that we have, not only can we better analyze and evaluate, but we can even maybe change the game in some plays where before we would have said this doesn't make the cut. And all of this is thanks to the capabilities, the technologies, the tools, the methods that all three of your companies are bringing to bear. How does somebody, like, where do we go from here? How do we take all of that conceptually and actually like materialize it in the world, in the real world? And I'm thinking also about, this is an industry that is in transition. Every week that goes by, it seems like it's evolving. So people are hesitant sometimes to make decisions about new tools or procedures or technologies because, well, then what happens if it changes again? So, so let's just talk about that a little bit. Maybe Tracy, what's the IBM? You guys have always been in the business of like scaling out big things for big people and big purposes. So how does this size up that way for you?
I think analytics in general, we've been doing and playing in that space for a long time. One of the things where IBM is supporting operators right now is really helping them scale that and operationalize. Let's get to an 70, 80% template, and how do we scale that either to different basins or different regions in one regard. I think one of the things that I'm really getting into right now is this whole concept of how can we learn collectively and still keep our secret sauce to ourselves, right? We want to be more automated. Well, operators have one set of information, OFS companies have another set of information, and we all need to really get it to the OEMs to say, hey, we really need you to redesign so that equipment and things can last for longer. Or how do we start automating PLCs, all of these things. So that's a big place where IBM, I think in the sensor space, a lot is happening with IoT, Industry 4.0. In some of these brownfields, we can't really re-instrument everything. It's cost prohibitive. But with new technology coming out, things like that and what we can instrument on wells. So big places in that space from a manufacturing side of the house, kind of edge components for plant manufacturing. So visual inspection, I think you've seen a lot of different drone programs, all of that information all coming back, removing trucks on the road. That's a big component with regards to carbon and what we're putting out there. And so tons of different things. I think it's a little bit more specific, but one of the things that we've been really starting to help is how do we get out of this POC incubation period and really scale? Because until we get to scale, we're not going.
We're good at POCs, though. We are really good at POCs.
I can make a few comments about that, but I think the industry is beginning to learn that POC forever is really not is the answer. So it has to be a practical implementation of something that can add value in very short order. Long-term R&D projects are not favored at the moment. And I think that you brought in a couple of really interesting topics because we have a customer, for example, that has 220 fields, over 20,000 wells, all mature wells, and they have two engineers that are running and deciding where the next well intervention, including workovers, are going to take place. And I think tools that enable those kind of capabilities such as the one that we're commercializing with Petrovisor, enables that kind of capability. And I think that you bring up a really good point is that the industry, reacts and takes advantage of those over time. And if you look at it, there's a lot of areas of opportunity that we can do, and including in the current, producing environment. And so, you just have to, operate at a cost that it is ahead of the competition in a responsible manner. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that also gets into what you mentioned before about culture and how we work and things like that. And actually, we're getting toward the end. So there was one question that we had that somebody asked about. I guess maybe we must have glossed over a little bit in our excitement. What tools are we referring to specifically? What tools? So maybe I do want to get to. I want to get to kind of wrap up with some strategic view and thinking about strategies and the go forward. But maybe let's just revisit the tools discussion a little bit in case we didn't hit that right on. So any one of you got whatever. What do we want? If I'm sitting out there and I'm going, okay, sounds great. What do I need? Like, what do I need to go buy, or what do I need to acquire? What do I need to, what's the shopping list? Do you think to be able to work this way?
Michael, I can jump in, and maybe I'll try to segue it into a bit of the strategy forward-looking as well, and see if I stick the landing. So from a tools perspective, and again, if we're thinking about it in terms of advantaged oil projects or advantaged projects generally, and again, lots of different dimensions I think that matter, and the whole panel I thought brought a lot of those examples to bear. Coming back to two that I think we've circled around quite a bit: cost competitiveness, carbon competitiveness.
Right.
Measuring those two things accurately is really, really hard. So I think one tool certainly is to ensure that the cost of delivery of a project is competitive with what your peers are doing. Again, we talked about the sort of the paradox of benchmarking. It's only as good as the data you have, and if you don't have data to the competitive advantage piece, it's really not worth your while. A specific tool that Power Advocate's bringing to bear for our operator partners is to help understand in an actionable way the benchmark performance of specific project cost elements, so that they understand where in a project cost stack they have opportunity to reduce their costing, and that can make the difference between an uneconomic and an economic project. And certainly can lead to significant insight into where there's opportunity to take cost out of their capital program and perhaps reinvest into new projects as well.
Right.
So cost benchmarking is one, competitive cost benchmarking. The second, I think, really pertains to carbon. And again, carbon's a tricky one because as I'm sure many folks watching and the panelists are aware, carbon spans everything from your own emissions. It's also the electricity you're using. It's also the upstream supply chain component. And the upstream supply chain component accounts for anywhere between 50 and 85% of the total emissions footprint of an E&P, or more broadly, an oil and gas operator generally. And again, that's the shipping and transportation associated with all the equipment you're purchasing. It's the steel, mining, manufacturing, milling, and distribution. It is the fuel you're burning to frack wells. It's the transport for water that's generated as waste product from drilling new wells. So it's all of this stuff that gets accumulated. Measuring that is a very challenging thing for a number of reasons. One of which, of course, is understanding what your exposure is to those different commodities.
Right.
How much steel am I actually consuming, and therefore what's my carbon impact as a result of that? Two is, where are you getting it from? Not all supply chain is created equal. One pathway may have a low carbon emissions footprint, another pathway may have a very high carbon emissions impact footprint. And therefore, another specific tool that Power Advocate's bringing to bear to help address this specific issue is enabling operators to map out the upstream supply chain behind every purchasing decision that they make, so that from a project planning perspective, they can account for the specific carbon impact, not just from a scope 1 and scope 2 perspective, but the 50 to 85% of emissions that are associated with the things that you're buying, the fuel you're burning, and the firms you're hiring. I guess the final piece is the trade-off. How do you equate those two things? And then it becomes really interesting for executives to say, I know the cost impact of a low carbon project. I can find my sweet spot, and I can make rational economic choices as to how much I'm willing to invest in order to pursue a higher cost project, but a lower carbon cost project.
Right. No, and that gets back to your point earlier about I'm busy, I'm focused on the flare, and really I could, the steel that I'm buying has a bigger impact. We have another question. So from Gabriel Francisco Suarez, are energy investors? So I haven't read this one first, so this one's just coming right out there. Are energy investors generally embracing ESG and the associated incremental costs when compared to a traditional E&P approach, or are they reluctant? Anyone on that?
I'll go. I think from a C-suite perspective, absolutely. I think earlier we mentioned it's a KPI for most C-suite leaders.
Right.
I think depending on where they operate headquarters, the focus might be the timeliness of where that focus is different. We can consider the European operators versus the US.
Sure.
But yes, in comparison, I'm sorry, I'm just rereading this question.
Yeah, the question was mostly about if I were to make that question a little bit, if I were to condense it and make it maybe less diplomatic, I would say, do the investors really believe it, or are they skeptical? Do they think we're not getting
Absolutely, they believe it.
Yeah.
Absolutely believe it, and I think it is being actioned by all operators across. And I think they're all just at different places in executing that strategy, or either defining what their strategy is going to be. But yes, I believe it is absolutely imperative, and they're all actioning it.
Yeah.
If I may add a comment on that, definitely, I think the publicly traded companies are under a huge amount of pressure to do this, but because they rely on investors coming in from all sorts of society, different parts of society. But I think how to operationalize what has been designed as a strategy and a position you want to be is what the discussion was centered today. Is how do you bring a practical implementation into an ESG strategy that can actually make money for your company?
Right.
And that is the big question. And is there a single tool out there? Probably not. But I think that it goes down to really enabling the teams, because teams want to act responsibly. They want to have the time to do so. So having the ability to be able to engage with the proper technology and the workflows and the automation processes and leveraging all the latest technology that's out there, that will drive the performance improvements on it.
Yeah.
So having the metrics and measuring it and benchmarking, I think, are the key components on this, really.
Yeah, I think the first company that shows a substantial cash positive on ESG initiatives is going to see a rally around an investor rally around their stock. Sean, anything else from the benchmarking and investment gurus there in your corner of the screen?
Yeah, I think it's table stakes at this point. It's not a matter of a choice. I mean, there's obviously always choice, but I think it's incumbent upon oil and gas firms to demonstrate some investment in ESG. And I think that, you look at the way firms are communicating to Wall Street their investments in this area. It's page 2 stuff in investor reports, and therefore,
right.
It's a high priority in boardrooms, high priority among investors, and no longer an if, but kind of how quickly. Yeah.
I think the nuance in that whole thing is everybody agrees it's table stakes. Absolutely, you have to do it. Maybe there's even opportunity to do it in a way that is profitable. But there's also there's the question of, but will you really do it? And when you say you're doing it, are you really doing it? And that's maybe kind of what's also kind of embedded in that question is are we showing, are you doing what you're claiming to be doing, which ties right back into, I mean, it's answering that question is the very same set of stuff, right? To answer the questions that we've been talking about in terms of, is this an advantaged project? Does it meet the economics? Does it meet the carbon economics? But not only do we have to kind of do the analysis up front, but we have to walk the walk and then show that we achieve those results at the end. So what, we have a few minutes left. I don't think we have any more questions. So maybe let's just talk about if I'm trying to put a strategy together for my company. I know we've hit on all of this so far, but if we kind of sum it up, what's the broad strategy that says, here's what you need to do to be successful, not just in the upfront evaluations, but to carry all the way through. What is that? If I'm writing that on the whiteboard in the conference room that nobody's in anymore, what does that picture look like?
I can start, Michael, and maybe just to offer sort of maybe a schematic or framework with how to think about it. Any project is built. It's built to generate cash flow for investors. So therefore, sort of priority one or framework one is how do we generate cash effectively. Mm-hmm. Framework two or priority two is how do we do so in a way for which we're not going to get punished by investors. And I think historically things like health and safety, right. Kind of things that have been present in our industry for a long time are sort of already there. I think the interesting thing now is you have this emergence of new factors, carbon, diversity, local supplier investment, local economic development, et cetera. And so for any project, you can think about ranking or benchmarking or scaling performance on each of those metrics. And it's really a matter of, again, finding the sweet spots of where cost and an impact, societal and environmental impact converge into a sort of a positive ROI on both bottom lines.
Right.
Seems to me to be maybe a overly simplified but perhaps effective way to think about developing advantage projects.
Well, the simple plans are the best ones. So Jorge, Tracy, anything else you want to add to that?
I guess for us, we do have a strategy group, and I think they use the three S's as guiding principles here. So when they're defining that strategy, what's the significance and where are the synergies across the ecosystem that they are a participant in? Because it's going to be a collective mission to get us there. And so bunch of different things. I think once we define that strategy based on some of those benchmarking metrics that Sean's talking about, it's like going back to what we're always saying, how do we start to go about executing that? Right. And so those are the three tenets that we think need to be in that overall goal.
But okay, so what were the three S's? I think I missed the.
So it's the three S's: a strategy, the significance, and then the synergies.
Synergies, got it. Excellent, thank you. And then Jorge, we have just enough time for you to say something inspirational on.
What I would say is within us to actually take the initiative, and there's a lot of great opportunities, great ideas, and but I think it starts from the top down. And what I would say is really for each leader out there that is driving a strategy for their companies is really ingrain this in the culture and make this as a part of their KPIs and put in the metrics and the tools necessary in order to make their people more efficient. And I think that will get down the road of identifying projects that could be economic, could be generate cash flow. And there's and the good news is that there's plenty of success out there to be gained. So and that's plenty of upside, for a lot of the strategies that we'll be talking here today.
Excellent, thank you. That is good news. There is a lot of success out there to be had. So that is going to put us right up against our promised hour. So big thanks to our all three of our guests today. Really appreciate all of you making time to join us on out here in live stream lands. And also want to say thank you to our audience for tuning in, because without you, we have no reason to do this. And so we appreciate you. And if you found this useful, please share it with your friends and family or anybody else that needs to learn about Advantaged Oil. And also want to say thank you again to our sponsor, Power Advocate, for sponsoring this series. And I always say we love our sponsors at OGGN, because without them there is no us, and that really is true. Also, special thanks to Mr. Russ Johns and his crew at Pirate Syndicate. They're the people behind the scenes here that actually make all this all this stuff work and produce these shows. So thanks to them. Look for the next episode coming out in this series. I don't know offhand exactly when it is, but it will be soon. And we'll be tackling some other topic under the heading of the search for ROI. Also, in the meantime, while you're anxiously awaiting for that to come out, you can connect with OGGN, the Oil and Gas Global Network, on our website, which is coincidentally oggn.com. You can also find us all over LinkedIn, and we have all kinds of things going on. So be sure and do that, and we'll see you next time.